You're standing in a line of women stretching so far you can't see where it ends. The dust from thousands of hooves still hangs in the air. Your city burned 3 hours ago. Your husband died defending the eastern gate. You watched him fall from the wall where you were hiding with your daughter. She's gripping your hands so tightly her nails draw blood, but you don't tell her to stop. The pain keeps you present, keeps you from dissolving into the screaming void opening inside your chest. A man on horseback rides slowly down the line. He's not looking at faces. He's looking at bodies, at hips and shoulders, and the way women hold themselves. When he stops in front of your daughter, she's 14, you step forward instinctively. A guard's spear across your throat stops you cold. You watch him tilt her chin upward with one finger, examining her like you'd examine fruit at a market. He says something in a language that sounds like wind through dead grass. A scribe steps forward with ink and parchment. Your daughter is pulled from the line. You lunge. The spear presses harder. You taste blood. The last thing you see is her face turning back to look at you one final time as they push her toward a wagon with barred windows. One of hundreds stretching behind the army like a serpent made of stolen lives. This happened. Not in myth, not in exaggerated legend designed to terrify enemies. This happened to tens of thousands of women across 2 continents. And if you're watching this from anywhere in the world right now, drop a comment and tell me where you are, because it amazes me that a story this devastating still matters to people everywhere. We know Genghis Khan built the largest contiguous empire in human history. We know he revolutionized warfare, united the Mongol tribes, conquered kingdoms from Korea to Hungary. We've turned him into a symbol of military genius, of unstoppable force, of historical greatness. But there's another story, one that doesn't fit comfortably in history textbooks or romanticized documentaries. A story about what happened to the women in the cities that fell, about what happened inside those wagons that followed his armies across half the world, about a system so methodical, so brutally efficient, that it altered the genetic structure of entire populations in ways we can still measure today. This isn't about battlefield tactics or the brilliance of Mongol cavalry. This is about weaponized rape as imperial policy. About conquest that didn't end with the surrender of armies, but continued in the bodies of captured women, in pregnancies forced upon them, in children torn from their arms and raised to serve the empire that destroyed their mothers' worlds. Genghis Khan understood something other conquerors missed. You can burn a city and it can be rebuilt. You can kill an army and new soldiers can be trained. But if you systematically impregnate the women of your enemies, if you replace their population from the inside out, that conquest becomes permanent, written into DNA itself, irreversible. And the records show he pursued this strategy with the same tactical brilliance he brought to warfare, the same organizational genius, the same ruthless efficiency. Before he was Genghis Khan, universal ruler of the Mongols, he was Temujin, a boy whose father was poisoned at a feast by rival tribesmen. The boy was 9 years old when his father's clan abandoned his family to die in the wilderness. His mother, Holin, kept them alive through sheer desperation, digging roots from frozen ground, catching fish with bare hands, eating anything that had calories. Temujin learned early that the world had no safety net, no mercy for the weak. He learned that trust was a luxury that got you killed. When his half-brother Bektar stole a fish they'd spent hours catching, Temujin and his brother Kassar made a decision. They stalked Bektar to a hillside and shot him. Their own brother, their mother beat Temujin until her hands bled, screaming that he was a mad dog, a destroyer. But Temujin had learned the fundamental law of his universe: take or be taken from. Show weakness and you die. By the time he was 16, he'd clawed his way back to marginal respectability. He was engaged to Bert, a girl from a neighboring clan. This marriage represented his chance to rebuild what his father had lost, to create alliances that might protect him. Then the Merkits came. They had long memories. Years earlier, Temujin's father had stolen a woman from a Merkit warrior. Temujin's own mother had been a kidnapped bride. Now they came to collect the debt. They raided at dawn. Temujin had seconds to decide: stand and fight, and almost certainly die, or run and live. He chose survival. He abandoned Bert and fled into the forest. He could hear her screaming his name as he rode away. For months afterward, he heard rumors that ate him alive. Bert was being raped by Merkit warriors. She was pregnant. She was dead. She wished she were dead. Every version was a knife. But one truth crystallized: He hadn't been strong enough to protect what was his. This failure became the defining wound of his life. Not just the loss of Bert, but what it represented: his fundamental inadequacy, his inability to hold what he claimed. For a man building his identity around strength and dominance, this failure was intolerable. When he finally gathered enough allies to raid the Merkits and take Bert back, she was pregnant. Visibly, undeniably pregnant. She gave birth 9 months after the rescue to a boy they named Joki, meaning guest or unexpected visitor. The name itself dripped with ambiguity. Was Joki Temujin's son or the son of a Merkit rapist? Nobody knew. Temujin publicly claimed the boy, but the question mark hung over Joki his entire life. Eventually, Joki would die under mysterious circumstances, possibly killed by his brothers, possibly by his father's order, possibly by his own hand, unable to bear the uncertainty. But here's what fundamentally changed in Temujin's mind. He watched how differently people responded to the trauma. The Merkit men who survived his rescue raid were completely broken. Some killed themselves rather than live with the dishonor. In Mongol warrior culture, losing in battle was ultimate failure. These men couldn't psychologically survive defeat. But the women survived. Bert survived. She adapted. She did what she must to stay alive. And then she bore a child. And that child grew up knowing exactly who had taken his mother, exactly what had happened, exactly who the enemy was. Temujin saw something in this pattern that no one else saw. Something that would change world history. Women weren't just the prize of war. They were the weapon. They were the mechanism through which conquest becomes permanent. A man killed is just dead. A city burned is just destroyed. But a woman impregnated carries the future inside her body. Control the women of your enemies, and you control the next generation. You don't need to occupy their lands forever. You just need to ensure the next generation carries your blood, speaks your language, grows up loyal to your empire. The conquered people will become Mongol from the inside out, because their own children will be half Mongol, raised in Mongol culture, thinking Mongol thoughts. This was the birth of something unprecedented: systematic rape as a tool of permanent imperial conquest. Organized with military precision and bureaucratic efficiency, over the next 15 years, Temujin transformed himself into Genghis Khan, uniting the Mongol tribes through military genius and strategic brutality. But alongside his military campaigns, he was developing something darker. When he raided rival clans in these early years, he didn't just take women randomly as personal prizes. He took all women of childbearing age. Every single one. He distributed them strategically among his warriors, not as rewards, not as entertainment, but as breeding stock. He tracked which women became pregnant, which pregnancies resulted in healthy children, which children showed sufficient Mongol traits. He was conducting experiments in forced population control, learning what worked, refining his methods. By 1206, when the Mongol tribes proclaimed him Genghis Khan, the Great Khan, he'd already developed what his administrators would eventually call the permanent seeding system. The terminology itself reveals everything. Not captured women, not war brides, seeding. Agricultural language applied to human reproduction. And the first large-scale experiments were about to begin. The Western Xia Kingdom was first, in 1209. They were wealthy from Silk Road trade, protected by fortified cities and professional armies. They thought they knew what steppe raiders looked like, barbarians who grabbed loot and retreat. They had no idea what was coming. The Mongol army that approached included the usual warriors, but also a baggage train that would puzzle any traditional military observer. Scribes carrying blank ledgers, census takers with demographic protocols, doctors specializing in reproductive health, administrators whose sole job was logistics of human processing. Before the siege even began, Mongol intelligence operatives had infiltrated Xia cities, not gathering military intelligence, but conducting population surveys. How many women in each district? Ages, physical characteristics, married or unmarried. How many previous children? Proof of fertility. All compiled into detailed registries before a single arrow was fired. When the first city fell, the Mongols divided the population with mechanical precision. This wasn't chaos. This was organized processing. Men were separated into groups. Most were simply executed. They were militarily dangerous and economically expensive to maintain. A few with specialized skills were enslaved. The vast majority of adult males were killed within hours. but the women were categorized according to pre-established protocols. Primary reproducers, ages 14 to 30, no visible disabilities, healthy appearance. They received an ink mark on the left wrist, a number corresponding to registry entries, each number unique, like a modern serial number. They were assigned to the first caravan. Secondary reproducers, ages 31 to 40, preferably women who'd already had children. Proven fertility was valuable even at older ages. Different mark, second caravan. Waste material, girls under 14, women over 40, anyone sick or disabled, these were taken to the edge of camp. What happened there isn't recorded in detail, but they didn't come back. The caravans that followed the Mongol army weren't improvised prison wagons. They were mobile processing facilities designed by people who'd thought carefully about managing thousands of captured women across vast distances. Each wagon was divided into compartments like stables for different animals. Newly captured women in one section, most dangerous, most likely to resist. Confirmed pregnant women in another, needing monitoring but less flight risk. Women who'd recently given birth in a third section, controlled by nursing infants. Women who'd failed to become pregnant after multiple months in a fourth section, facing much higher mortality rates because unproductive stock was eliminated to free resources. Mongol doctors, trained in Chinese and Persian medical traditions, developed techniques specifically for maximizing pregnancy rates. They experimented with herbs affecting fertility. They implemented dietary protocols, discovering certain nutritional balances improved conception. They even performed crude surgeries to correct physical problems preventing pregnancy. These weren't healers working from compassion. They were livestock managers applying veterinary techniques to human reproductive stock. The parallels to animal husbandry were explicit in surviving administrative records. Terms used for horse breeding appear in documents about caravan women. The bureaucracy was obsessive. Every rape was logged, the woman's identification number, the date, which caravan, which guard or warrior was responsible. Not for sentimental reasons, for genetic tracking. They were trying to understand which combinations produced the healthiest, most Mongol-looking children. Every pregnancy was registered the moment it was confirmed. Women lost their names the day they were captured. They became numbers. Unit 4,362. Unit 7,691. The Mongol clerks tattooed these numbers on their wrists in permanent ink. Beneath the number, codes indicating tribal origin, social class, reproductive history. A woman could look at her own wrist and see her identity reduced to administrative data. Everything she was, daughter, sister, wife, mother, person with dreams and a name her own mother gave her. All erased, replaced with numbers defining her only in terms of utility to Mongol imperial expansion. Some women tried desperately to resist this erasure. They whispered their real names to their children during brief moments before the Mongols separated them. They carved symbols into their skin where tattoos couldn't cover, their husband's name, their village, their family clan sign. Anything to remember who they were. They taught each other their names in whispered chains, each woman memorizing the names of women in her wagon so someone somewhere might remember. But the system was designed to break these connections. Guards who caught women communicating punished them severely. Children were separated from mothers within days of birth, within hours for the ones who didn't pass inspection. The children born in the caravans faced immediate, ruthless evaluation. Within hours of birth, Mongol officials inspected each infant for specific physical traits, facial structure, eye shape, hair, skin tone markers, believed to predict successful integration into Mongol society. This wasn't arbitrary cruelty, it was policy, refined through observation. Babies who passed inspection were taken from their mothers within days and given to Mongol families. Raised speaking only Mongolian, worshipping Mongol spirits, they grew up believing themselves fully Mongol. Most never learned their origins. They became warriors, administrators, mothers of the next generation, living bricks in an empire built on their birth mother's suffering. Those who failed inspection were killed immediately, sometimes through exposure, sometimes more directly. The records rarely specify methods. To administrators, this was waste disposal, failed quality control. For the mothers, the moment was shattering. After months of systematic rape, a woman gave birth under guard in a wagon designed for processing human breeding stock. Within hours, her child was gone. If it looked Mongol, she would never see it again. If it didn't, She might hear it cry as it was carried away, or see a bundle that stopped moving. Some women broke completely, becoming catatonic and unresponsive. The records describe them clinically unproductive due to mental deterioration. They were eliminated. Others hardened into something colder, fearless, dangerous, with nothing left to lose. And some survived by dissociation, becoming mechanically compliant. Administrators labeled them acclimated and highly productive, mistaking psychological death for efficiency. By 1211, during Genghis Khan's invasion of the Jin Empire, the system had moved from experiment to standard procedure. In Zhangdu, modern Beijing records indicate over 40,000 women of reproductive age were captured and processed. By 1213, more than 100,000 women were distributed across a vast caravan network, stretching hundreds of kilometers behind the army. These caravans became mobile cities, larger and more organized than most medieval towns. Managing them required advanced logistics. Capture squads specialized in rounding up women during raids. Classification officials examined teeth, posture, skin, conducting crude gynecological inspections to assess reproductive viability, often in under 2 minutes. Acclimation supervisors oversaw the first months of captivity, a euphemism for systematic rape designed to break resistance. Pregnancy monitors tracked gestation, not out of care, but because miscarriages were failed production cycles. Midwives, often captured women themselves, were forced to deliver babies. Elimination crews disposed of the dead and of infants who failed inspection. The Mongols documented it all. Manuals for industrial-scale sexual violence survived in later Chinese archives, preserved as administrative records. They read like factory protocols, except the products were traumatized, women and mixed-race children. By 1219, during the conquest of the Khwarezmian Empire, the system reached its most refined form. Cities like Bukhara, Samarkand, and Merv weren't merely sacked, they were harvested. Women were separated from families with psychological precision. Mothers were kept with young children briefly to increase compliance, then separated after hope had time to reform. Crushing that hope produced maximum collapse. Social class mattered. Noble women received better treatment rape by high-ranking officers. Slightly improved conditions, not from mercy, but selective breeding. Mongols observed that children of noblewomen raised with Mongol ideology made especially effective administrators. By 1220, caravan networks stretched from Mongolia to Eastern Europe, processing hundreds of thousands of women. Resupply stations, field hospitals, classification centers, morgues. The infrastructure rivaled kingdoms. Mobile industrial complexes dedicated to forced reproduction followed the armies like shadows. The true horror wasn't efficiency, but permanence. Genghis Khan understood what others missed. Rape is temporary. Genes are forever. Every child born carried Mongol genetic markers into the future. Modern genetics confirms this. Roughly 16 million men alive today descend from his lineage, 1 in 200 worldwide. When Genghis Khan died in 1227, caravan women were redistributed like livestock. Thousands were executed during succession chaos to prevent escape. Mass graves discovered by archaeologists reflect the same bureaucratic order that governed the living system. Near Bukhara, archaeologists found 2 bodies buried together, a mother and teenage daughter. DNA confirmed their relationship. Isotope analysis showed the girl had traveled vast distances before dying. The names are lost, the bones remember. The Mongols didn't see themselves as monsters, they believed they were building order. The reproductive system was statecraft, as legitimate as taxation. That banality, evil expressed as administration, is what makes it so chilling. The women's names are gone, but their DNA remains, written into millions of bodies across Eurasia. Conquest became permanent, not through death, but through forced life. Genghis Khan's greatest atrocity was understanding that controlling reproduction meant controlling the future. Empires fell, the genes endured. And remembering is the only monument these women have left.